You're exactly right. How many books have been written based on English Bible there, based on certain assumptions? And the authors have no idea. They literally don't know what they don't know.
Andrew comments, never thought of it as biblical theology when thinking of it, especially compared with systematic theology.
Now, let's use an illustration. We can do exegesis, and we can do biblical theology on Genesis 1:26 through 28. Okay, we'll use that as an example, where Adam and Eve are given a series of commands. Commands have to do with sustaining creation, subduing creation, being steward kings over the earth, and so on and so forth. We can use the tools of biblical exegesis to understand what's being said there and do biblical theology, observing patterns and whatnot. Does it reuse any material? Is this material going to get reused somewhere else? Again, we're doing biblical theology. What systematic theology does is systematic theology approaches this passage topically. It's very topical and very eclectic. This is what systematic theology does. It tries to take all these points that are floating out here and bring them together and synthesize whatever the subject is topically. Biblical theology cares only about what we can discern from the text itself. So biblical theology and systematic theology are different, but they ought to be partners. Biblical theology ought to be giving systematic theologians the results of exegesis, where they can build better topical studies and better foundations. They have more tools to work with, more data to work with. But that's typically not the way things go. Typically, they're competitors, even within believing Christianity. You'll get the biblical guys, the biblical scholars who are out there waving the biblical theology flag, and I'm one of those. But oftentimes, there'll be a sort of an adversarial relationship with the systematic theologians who are weaker in the languages, if they know the languages at all, and are dealing with English Bible and are approaching things not just in a passage, but again, drawing data from all sorts of other passages, all sorts of other places, approaching questions philosophically and theologically rather than exegetically. But again, these should be partners in the church. To me, the blame should go on the biblical theologian. The blame should go on the biblical studies people for not giving the systematic theologians better data. A lot of times biblical scholars will just do what they do for the glory of it. Biblical scholars are people who love to chase nuts and bolts across the Testaments. Their dissertation is on one word or one grammatical feature in the entire Hebrew Bible. They're nuts and bolts kind of people. They're very granular. They want to spend their time doing the grunt work of textual work. But very few of them want to then take that and do theology with it. It's not the way biblical scholars are trained nowadays. You go to the university, nobody's doing theology there. At Wisconsin had a very long track record of accepting evangelical students into the graduate school program. I think when I was there, we had maybe 12, 15 graduate students, and all of us were believers, different denominations, but we all had testimonies of faith in Christ. There were no Jewish graduate students in the Department of Hebrew Studies at the University of Wisconsin. We had Jewish professors, but there were no Jewish graduate students. There were lots of Jewish undergrads, but nobody in the grad school. We were all believers. We were all Christians. And we all got the same lecture the first week we started. We just began referring to it as the talk. This was the theology talk at Wisconsin. Our chairman at the time, Dr. Fox, Michael Fox, basically would get us each in there one at a time in his office and say, we know who you are. We have your transcripts. We know what you think. We know what you believe. We don't care. We're not going to insist that you adopt any belief or any way of thinking here. We just want you to do good work in the text. If you do theology here, you're not going to last. We do not do theology at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. We do biblical studies. So it was very clear and very honest. I appreciated it. And sure enough, every year somebody would cross the line and violate it and get kicked out. And we would just all kind of shake our heads, like, what wasn't clear about the talk? And that's just the way it was. And that's the way biblical studies is. You're trained to do nuts and bolts work. What you do with it later on is your business, but we do not do theology in biblical studies departments. And that's the way they look at it. It's just Wisconsin happened to be very upfront with it. But that's the way it's presumed.
You mentioned about the necessity of systematic theologians to have good material. For example, in the last paper about the desire of the wife for the husband, that word desire in Genesis 3. How many books have been written about the husband and wife relationship based on an English translation of a word that we are not really sure if it's correctly translated.
You're right, the last reading we had with Teshuvah. You're exactly right. How many books have been written based on the English Bible there, based on certain assumptions? And the authors have no idea. They literally don't know what they don't know, which is kind of dangerous, depending on what the topic is. But somebody, somewhere, they should have come across this problem, this issue, and should have at least acknowledged it in their book or tried to do something with it.